So thank you, Rod, for introducing earlier. My name is Rick Pekin. Most of you know me. I've served here on the staff team for a while, but I also wear my hat with Bible Society. And part of Bible Society's work also includes things like Kurong, Eternity News, and Center for Public Christianity, which is why we're so privileged to have Simon Smart here, who is the director of Center for Public Christianity. So give Simon a hand as we welcome him up. He's going to share the message for us, but hello, Simon.
Hello, Rick.
How are you going this morning?
Good to see you. Thank you. Yeah, lovely to be here.
Yep, and it's good to have you all the way from Sydney with us for the weekend. We've done some other stuff in Perth this weekend, but to start, can you tell us just about your family, where you've come from, things like that?
Yep, so I live on the northern beaches, near, some of you would have heard of Manly. That's a kind of nice place. I live over that way. I have a wife and two kids. I have a 21-year-old daughter and a 19-year-old son, and they both still live with us. Although my son is backpacking around Europe for 6 months, so we haven't seen him for a while. Actually, I went and visited him, but haven't seen him much lately. But, yeah.
Cool. And one actually thing I want to add that I didn't prep you for is you studied in North America. Can you tell us about the experience of your study and even people that taught you during that study?
Sure. So I did. So I was a history teacher for a long time. Then I moved to Canada, to Vancouver, to Regent College, where I did a theological degree over there. And some of your heroes, Rick, were my teachers, like people like Gordon Fee and Eugene Peterson and John Stackhouse, people like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
and
so
it was great. It was a fabulous experience. Our daughter was born there, so she's a Canadian, and it was I loved it. It was fun.
Yeah, close enough. What do you think? Just very briefly, what was the impact of being taught by authors that many of us would recognize and know? What was the particular impact of that?
Well, yeah, it was great, and sometimes they and people who are theologians and biblical scholars aren't everyone's heroes, let's be honest, but I was these were people I'd really looked up to a lot, and people sometimes say don't meet your heroes because you're going to be sometimes disappointed, but I had kind of the opposite experience actually. So, and I don't want to overclaim the personal friendships I had with these people, but I did feel that they lived what they wrote, and they wrote what they lived, and that was impressive and had a kind of lasting impact.
Cool. Thanks for that. Now, tell us about CPX. What even does CPX stand for, how it started, and its work in Australia?
Yes, I'm glad to, and you've got to stop me because I could talk for hours about this, so give me a minute. But I don't presume anyone here knows what CPX is, the Centre for Public Christianity, but I hope some of you do, and I hope by the end of today you'll be interested enough to go and check it out, because I think it could be a gift to you and to your friends. So Centre for Public Christianity is a media company. We're based in Sydney, but we have people in Melbourne and Adelaide and one day Perth, not yet. But it's the whole aim of what we do is to promote the public's understanding of the Christian faith. We're trying to be in spaces where a Christian voice is rarely heard. And so, or if it is heard, it might be the voice you might not always want. And it's so we do a lot for mainstream media. We write articles. They sometimes invite us onto radio programs, television programs, and so on, to be we hope, a thoughtful, engaging, respectful Christian voice in these public spaces. I think Christians abandon public spaces at our peril, actually. I don't think it's the whole sort of story, but I think it's an important piece in the puzzle of Christian engagement with the world. And so we do that by, as I say, writing for mainstream media, but we also, everything we produce, all our content, we have a weekly podcast, we do public events, we produce books and documentaries, and everything we do, this is the distinctive thing about what we do at CPX, everything we do is for your non-believing cousin, daughter, friend. That's who it's for. And even though that it's for them, Christians benefit from it too, but we're truly trying to speak to that person. And so we hope it's the sort of material where you might listen to a podcast, read an article, see a little video clip or something, and you think, you know what? Rebecca, who I work with, she's not a Christian, but I reckon she'd like that. And that's our hope. We're trying to do it for her. So Christian people are a channel to get to those people. And so that's a kind of the distinctive thing we do. We do it in a way where we're wanting to be out in public, being engaged, clearing away bad arguments against Christianity, kind of sowing seeds or tilling the ground. I sometimes describe it as, you've got this hard soil and we're trying to till the ground and make it a little bit more receptive so that when you come along, people aren't immediately sort of dismissing this thing that you believe, but actually there might be more of a receptivity to it. And so that's what we're trying to do. We cop a bit of flack along the way, as you can imagine, but we think it's worth doing. We think it's worth taking that risk and being out in public, trying to present what's core to Christianity. People often pick up little bits and pieces, and it sounds kind of unappealing because it's just people fighting each other over particular issues. Whereas we're trying to get to what's the basis of this faith, and trying to articulate that to people who are, let's be honest, quite estranged from that story. And what I'll be talking about today is related to that.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think one of the things I've always been interested in, and I don't do a ton of mainstream media stuff, but I know that you've been on The Drum recently, and there's a lot of other media entities that approach you. Why do you think, or what do you think about CPX leads to a secular media company inviting someone called the Center for Public Christianity to speak into that space? What is it about you that you think is inviting about that?
Well, it's not immediately clear why people would do that, other than we've built up a reputation over a long period of time, about 15 years now, of trying to be a thoughtful, engaged presence in what the conversation is that's going on. And so it might not be sort of the first thing people think of, we better get the Christians on to talk about this. But if you get enough interesting material for people, hopefully they start to think, actually, there might be a perspective here that's worth hearing. I hope that's what we've been able to do over time.
Yeah, and when I was in youth work years ago as CPX was starting, I always remember thinking, I knew about CPX before I started this role. It's like, these are the guys that are not obnoxious about Christianity and can actually speak in a both authoritative way in the culture, but also in a generous and thoughtful way, which I think many of us in this church are interested in. So That's one of the things I love about CPX. Now, sort of the last question before I have you speak to us is, Livestreams has supported CPX very generously through the Legacy Fund during the last cycle of funding. Why is it important for churches and Christians to support the work of CPX?
Well, thank you. And we're very, very grateful for that support. It might sound a bit presumptuous for me to say why people should support it, but I'll tell you why I hope. Because it's very foreign these days for people to hear what Christianity is really about. And so we think it's a very important piece of this puzzle, of this engagement strategy, if you like, or that people can not immediately have the shutters up, when they think of, what's Christianity about? And I will talk about this in my talk, because we're entering a very interesting period, I think, for Christians in a culture like this. But I hope that we're playing a role, as I say, in kind of keeping that conversation going, maybe stoking a little bit of imagination, appealing to people's longings, because human universal longings are the thing that we often try to get to. Because people do all long for the sorts of things that Christian faith speaks directly into. I long for my life to mean something more than just whatever I can conjure up myself. I long for things like justice that doesn't appear to be able to be fulfilled in this life. I long for deep and meaningful relationships. I long for proper community. But that you might not have places where you think you can go to get those answers, and I think we've got a lot to offer. And so that's why I hope we can be playing that role.
And the very last dangerous question, I know the camera's rolling. How can I pray for you now, and how can we pray for CPX?
Well, for continued openings and doors to open where you might think they haven't, and that has happened actually over the years, for wisdom, because you need wisdom, and creativity, and grace.
Cool. Well, let's pray together, church.
Yeah.
Father, I lift up Simon, and I lift up the entire team. I lift up those who work with him, work as a team, both those behind the scenes and those who are also speaking in the public space. I do pray for wisdom upon them as they speak, as they discern what spaces to speak into, what words and context to speak when they're in those spaces. And we particularly lift up Simon, his leadership. Pray for him as he speaks to us today, as he shares today, and I pray that people in the space will have the ears to hear and maybe have the avenues to share with their skeptic friends as well. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Rick.
Go for it. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Let me just have a sip of water before I start and say again how grateful I am to be here with you. And it's been nice to have a few days in Perth. I like Perth. I like coming over here. So as I say, we're going to be talking, and a particular Bible passage today that I think is going to help us with our topic. So I'm going to pick up on 1 Peter chapter 3, and I'll be reading from that in a moment. But yes, it's everything's framed within the idea of what does it look like for a Christian presence in what many people describe now as a post-Christian environment. So that's where we're going. And I hope you'll join me. A few years ago now, I wrote a book with 2 atheists and a Muslim. And the book was called For God's Sake. And it was trying to engage with our very different worldviews and to really have disagreement, but also to remain friends by the end. And I think we managed to do that, actually. And it was a great experience. I loved that. I love this sort of thing. And when we launched the book, we launched it in what the census tells me is the most secular part of Australia, right, in the inner west of Sydney. And we had this person host it, and he is Peter Fitzsimons. He's especially on the East Coast, he's a very well-known journalist and historian, and he was an ex-rugby player. He played for Australian rugby. He's a very large man. He's an enormous person. He's quite an intimidating kind of person, and he's an evangelistic atheist. He takes every opportunity to slag off the church and Christians and so on. So he was the host, and it was kind of a bit of a lion's den kind of moment for me because I'm up there on the panel. The Muslim woman couldn't come that night, so I was the only one on the panel who believed anything, really. And so we start the evening off, and Peter Fitzsimons turns to me and he says, "Now, Simon, from what I remember from religious studies classes at school, Christianity is about if you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. Is that a good summary of your faith?" And I said, "No, that's a terrible summary of my faith. Perhaps you should have paid more attention in religious studies classes." To which he said, "Well, in the final exam, I got 49%. And I've been taking my revenge ever since." Which I thought was a pretty good, fair enough. There is a lot, isn't there, of misunderstanding about what's core to Christianity today. There really is. Now, when you think about this sort of climate that we're in, I do think it's always worth pointing out that it's not Syria or Pakistan or South Sudan. Christians in Australia are not facing terrible persecution at all. We sometimes overcook that, but they're not. But the sheer strangeness, the foreignness of Christianity today is obvious to anyone who tries to sort of engage in any sort of public discussion of Christian beliefs. And the world's a very different place in that regard from even when I was a small boy. There's no doubt there's been, in the last 30 or 40 years, a huge shift in people's understanding of, their connection to, and their feelings about the church and Christianity as a faith. Now, the census data tells it's limited, but one kind of important story. In 2016, 52% of people ticked Christian on the census, however you want to, imagine that, what that means. It had been 61% the time before, then it goes to 52%, and then the most recent one in 2021, it drops to 43.9% of people. Meanwhile, those who say, "I have no religion at all," moves from 30% up to 38%, just a little bit over that. That's interesting, isn't it? The figures, and I like to think of different ways of approaching this, but things like the figures of people who would turn up at the church to get married have fallen precipitously in the last 30 years. It's unbelievable. You used to do that, and that would just be a matter of course. and now it's really quite rare actually. 6 out of 10 funerals today are done by a non-religious celebrant. And 2/3 of people in Australia will say that they don't have a close personal friend who's a Christian. 2/3 of people say that. Now, if you marry that against the caricatures of Christianity and what Christians like in literature and film and in the media, it's no wonder that if you don't have that one person, I think all the Christians are idiots. Oh, but I know Rick, he's okay, he's a nice guy. Oh, I know that Rod guy down the church, he's a good guy. If you don't have that, then you've got nothing to mess with your sort of preconceptions. I want to come to that, back to that in a moment. There's also what I would call a grave cultural amnesia when it comes to understanding the place of Christianity in our culture. There was a survey out a couple of years ago that found that only around half of Australians understand Jesus' life to have been significant in the history and culture of the world. It's unbelievable. If you put the word extremely important, that figure drops to 1/3 of people. I mean, the life of Jesus. We date everything's dated on the life of Jesus. So that's something for us to reckon with. We have to think about that. And you might be sitting there going, well, this is all sounding a bit depressing. But I want to say, no, it's not. Well, yeah, it is at one level, but let's not always think of these things as terrible, but opportunities. What are the opportunities here? What can we really offer post-Christian Australia? I think an awful lot. Now, at one level, you might say it's an obvious thing to say, but I'm trying to get down at the level of that person you're friends with who seems utterly uninterested. What could we offer that person? Well, our culture is struggling, actually. If we look a bit deeper, we look a bit below the surface of the sort of material prosperity, which not everyone has, but an awful lot of us have, there are some underlying problems. In his book, Australia Reimagined, Hugh Mackay paints a picture that would tell us that all is not well, actually, in the suburbs. He says, 1/3 of us are likely to be affected by mental illness in our lives. The biggest killer for people under 40 is suicide. A young guy, this came home to me last weekend. A young guy, I used to coach him footy, very successful person, drove to a park in Queensland in Mount Tamborine and jumped off. Had a young child and a wife. And sort of these figures that I sometimes find myself quoting, sometimes they come home to you in very, very real ways. We are, according to Hugh Mackay, more self-absorbed, more competitive and more socially fragmented than we've ever been before. And on top of all that, we have a loneliness epidemic. Do you know this? People are lonely in Australia. In the UK, they now have a minister in government, a minister for loneliness. We don't have that here yet, but it's a serious social problem. It's a health problem too, actually. 40% of Australians today say they've never felt lonelier. 1 in 4 say they don't have people they can regularly talk to. More than 1/3 of us say they rarely feel like they are part of a group of friends. And here's the thing, the loneliest of all generations, it's not just people in nursing homes who no doubt are lonely. Gen Z and millennials say they're the loneliest of all of us. The extraordinary progress of humanity has not solved our deepest questions. Air travel, the iPhone, air conditioning, cars that don't usually break down, dentistry, all these good things can't, on their own at least, deliver what all of us need, which is the power of a story to which we belong. One that provides us with grounding and purpose and perspective and meaning. And life tends to remain mysterious in all the areas that really matter to us, like love and friendship, beauty and tragedy, the search for wisdom and the good life. And I want to just say to you, as an encouragement, Christianity speaks powerfully into every one of those things. And that should give us a sort of an encouragement, I think. At CPX, as we do this work, we take great encouragement from the New Testament book of 1 Peter, which is a book that I think particularly speaks to particularly suited to our times. Into that environment that Peter's addressing, it's a place where it's not easy to be Christian and it's getting a bit harder. It feels about right, okay? It's not easy, it's getting a bit harder. We don't yet have the really severe persecution that's coming in that environment in Asia Minor that he's addressing. At the moment, at that point, it's sort of harder to conduct business if you're a Christian. There's some social ostracism. It's not really the ticket to climb the ladder, socially or any other way. And here he comes, Peter, addressing the Christians. And this is what he says. Finally, this is in chapter 3. Finally, all of you be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. For, and then he quotes Psalm 34, whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongue from evil, their lips from deceitful speech, and they must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. And then here's the bit I want to focus on today. Who is going to harm you if you are eager to do good? But even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Sorry, I forgot to push it on. Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened. Here's the key. But in your hearts, revere, or another way of saying that is set apart. So revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. And we sometimes stop there and forget this next bit. But do this with gentleness and respect. This is kind of key. Always give an answer, but do it with gentleness and respect. Sometimes we haven't done that. Keeping a clear conscience so that those who speak maliciously against your good behaviour in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. Okay? So here we go. We're engaging with post-Christian Australia. What does 1 Peter tell us to do? Revere Christ as Lord. Always give an answer for the hope that you have, but do it with gentleness and respect. This is how the Christian is to live in the world and to be a presence among people who are not Christian. All right. 1 Peter urges us to revere or set apart Christ as Lord. And therefore, what he's trying to say to you is you can rest in that. You don't, therefore, if you truly think Christ is Lord, it's worth sort of remembering what that means. It means he's absolutely Lord of all things. You can actually relax a bit. Christians, relax. It's okay. It's actually going to be okay. And because of that, you're not feeling under siege, but you're truly trusting God to be in control. And therefore, you come to this task of engagement with a bit more of a relaxed, confident assurance about you. You're not sort of balled up in defensiveness and anger. It will really impact the posture that you bring to sometimes difficult, things. Revere Christ as Lord. If you truly believe that, you know that he is Lord of your university tutorial. He is Lord of the media studio. He's Lord of the P&C meeting at your local school. He's Lord of the newspaper, newsroom or whatever. He actually is. And your footy club or whatever it might be that you're in, if you believe that, you can afford to lose as well, because it doesn't matter. Ultimately, victory is sort of assured. Now, there's a famous essay, I'd recommend if you're interested in reading this. It's an essay on 1 Peter by the theologian Miroslav Volf, and it's titled Soft Difference. I want to just touch on this for a moment. Soft difference. Now, the image that I like to bring to that, it's sort of, here's the nature of Christian presence. What does that look like? Soft difference. Now, there's an image I like to attach to that, and that is of the great big high jump mat. Now, some of you who have been PE teachers know what these are like, or perhaps you're actually athletes and you do this sort of stuff. But there's some things to know about a high jump mat. And this is the metaphor that I'm trying to use to say this is what Christian presence should feel like. Okay? Now, the high jump mat, if you encounter it, you'll understand something, that it's substantial. Right? It has substance. It's not easily pushed around. In fact, it's really hard to move. There's something formidable there, and yet to come into contact with the high jump mat is a pleasant experience. In fact, it's a life-giving experience, isn't it? Encountering Christians ought to be like that you are encountering life itself when you encounter Christians. Now, that isn't everyone's experience, let's be honest, but it should be. It ought to be the case that when people encounter you and your friends in this community, they feel like, oh, there's something really significant here. It feels like life itself, because that's what it is. When it comes to kind of public Christianity, but when I use that phrase, it can mean all sorts of different things, but you know what I mean, this engagement with the non-believing world. There are great opportunities for every one of us to be that kind of difference in people's lives. And another little thing about that is it's good in that case to be offering the things that we're for and not just the things that we're against. I've got a sense that the world kind of understands what we're against now. What are we for? In light of all that, I like to present this kind of engagement as trying to be good company. Let's be good company when people encounter us. What are some things that are required to be good company? There's lots of them. Here's just a couple. The first thing would be, accept that you're an outsider. Accept it. Accept that you're an outsider. It's not your house. Christians in the West once held the keys to power. They don't anymore. We don't anymore. And some people say that might even be a good thing. But believers need to recognise that and therefore speak not with an air of entitlement, but with humility and respect. And I think, sort of politeness. I think Peter would encourage us in that way. And then the other thing is to understand that you are in a culture that is sort of naive to, or let's say ignorant of what you believe, but also suspicious of your motives. It's not very, I know, that's tough, right? But we have to remember this. Not just what you say, but how it will be heard. If people are ignorant of what you believe, but also suspicious of your motives, that's the reality, and so you have to sort of deal with that. I think to be good company, you really need to be a good listener. That's a crucial thing, don't you think? While I'm talking, I want you to think about every person you know who's not a Christian and ways we can sort of engage well with that. So you're kind of, I'm thinking of Doug here or whoever it is. We need to be a good listener. There's nothing worse than the person who turns up and just gives their opinion on everything the whole time, doesn't listen to anyone else. They're not good company. So we just shouldn't be like that. We want to be people who would ask the right questions, show empathy, listen to the hopes and the fears and the anxieties. There's a lot of anxiety around what people are. What are they imagining the good life looks like? I have to listen carefully to that if I'm going to engage well with it. to make observations of our culture. We have to be sort of alert to that. What are the influences on the people around us? What are the influences on us? Because of course, we're in that culture as well. Also, we've got to know the audience or whoever. We've got to know the audience and love the audience. I think this is really important. Given the loneliness epidemic that I spoke of earlier, this seems a crucial thing. The Christian call for community and hospitality, welcome, true welcome, is a rare thing and a very important thing. My kids are involved in Christian Surfers Youth in Manly, where we live. And a little while ago, I went to an afternoon tea where they had some of the parents come in. They're going to tell you what was going on in the next little while. And then they got a guy up to speak who was there to say why he lets his kid go to Christian Surfers. Now, he wasn't a Christian, this guy, but he was here to talk it up and say why it was good. And as he got up, I was thinking, who's this guy? I haven't seen him before. And he had the sort of look of someone who'd lived quite the life, I have to say. And he kind of said, look, I have to tell you, there's a young person, this is not my thing, and I formed the Nude Bondi Surfers group, okay, and whenever the Christian surfers turned up, we used to chuck eggs at them and all this sort of stuff, and it was when he was young. But here he is now, several years later, and he's got a little 13-year-old boy. And he works up at the psych hospital, and he knows that, there's terrible damage sometimes done to people when they're not, living well. And so he turns up and he's walking along the beach. He's trying to find a group that would accept his kids. And what he noticed was a lot of the groups would say, you're really welcome if you're a red hot surfer. And then he came across the Christian surfers. And he described it like this. He said there were kids of all different ages. They had the barbecue going. They were big smiles. They were welcoming in. Oh, come on, mate. Come and be part of this. He said it was absolute, full-on welcome to this kid. And he thought, well, this is pretty good. So the kid starts going. He goes for a couple of weeks. Then he gets sick, and he got really sick. He had this terrible infection. The doctors couldn't work out what to do. And he ends up in the Children's Hospital at Westmead, which, if you know Sydney, is as far from Manly as you can get. And he's in there, and it's quite bad. Like, he was quite seriously ill. And so the Christian Surfers leaders go, right, let's get a minibus, and we're going to go visit this kid. So they get all the kids in the minibus. They drive all the way to Westmead. Selfish teenagers, right? They're not. They were great. And they all go out there to see this kid, and the dad's there, and they say to him, we're here to visit him. They're all around the bed. And then they said, can we take him to the chapel? Because we want to pray for him. And the dad's like, yeah, okay. Well, he doesn't really know what to make of this. So they take him to the chapel, and they pray for him, and then they leave. 2 days later, amazingly, he gets better. Really quickly. And it was a bit of a shock to the dad. And the dad, he had tears in his eyes while he told this story. He said, I don't know what this is all about, but there's something special about this group. And I thought to myself, this is one of the most natural, unforced, compelling visions of Christian community and hospitality that I've seen for a long time. Let's be doing that. I mean, I know you are, right? But let's be encouraged, because it makes a big difference. We need to find ways to be part of the broader community, contributing to the common good. We need Christians in the footy clubs and the climbing clubs or whatever people do. We need Christians there, because 2/3 of the people don't have a friend who's a Christian. We've got to be in those places and engaging. It's a big challenge for us to be that, but we can be a positive presence and get past the tribalism and the polarization. And we need to find ways to be able to do that. All right, I'm going to skip past this a little bit because I feel like I'm going to be overstaying my welcome. I was going to just mention, you could go back and read it, Jeremiah 29. And my point was, the Bible's so thoroughly consistent in the way it talks about this topic. The people of God being taken into exile. And do you remember the instruction? Marry, build houses, seek the good of the city. Seek the good of the city. That's what we're called to do. We also want to appeal to the imagination. Here are these people estranged from this grand story, but with deep longings in their heart. How do we appeal to that? Remembering that truth divorced from beauty lacks the power to kind of enthrall you. And there's beauty in the Christian faith. We need to find ways to communicate that to people. I'm going to finish with one last story here. You might remember, or you might know the story of this couple. And if you only listen to one podcast episode from Life and Faith, which is our podcast, listen to this one. I promise you, you'll find it engaging. This is Danny and Layla Abdullah. And you might know them because 3 years ago they became well known when their lives were utterly shattered, when 3 of their children, Anthony, who was 13, Angelina, who was 12, and Sienna, who was 8, along with their cousin, Veronique, were walking along a street in Western Sydney on a summer's night going to buy an ice cream when a drunk and drug-affected driver who was driving his ute in a most ridiculous, crazy way ploughed into this group of little kids, and all 4 of them were killed on the spot and at the scene. It was a terrible scene. The first people on the scene were the parents, and then police officers, battle-hardened police officers, who I talked to a chaplain months later who said that there were people deeply, deeply affected by this. Now, that would be bad enough and notable enough, but the most stunning thing about this is that this couple, the next day, famously fronted the media and forgave the driver who'd killed their children. It was a huge shock to everyone. It made us all kind of lean forward to try to understand what's going on here. And there was a journalist in The Guardian who wrote that wherever that love and forgiveness came from, millions of people are pondering the beautiful, provocative mystery of it all. Where does that come from? Well, it comes from the fact that the Abdullahs follow the one who called us to love our enemies, to pray for the people who persecute you, to turn the other cheek. And they famously prayed forgiveness for him, for that driver. Now, they would say that they experienced divine help in their quest to do that. And when you meet them, I was very personally struck by this. They had this sort of serene demeanour to them. It was quite stunning, actually. Deep grief, and yet this kind of hopefulness too that went alongside that. And I want to say that they had this eternal perspective on this situation. They had an eternal perspective on their lives. The father said to me, every day I wake up and we know we're one day closer to seeing our kids again. This kind of perspective, I mean, it's stunning, right? This is the kind of perspective that shapes all of life if we adopt it. It provides a solid foundation, a deep purpose, and it gives you a sort of an eternal future within which it sort of invades the present. The future invades the present so that every aspect of your life has this sort of sacredness to it. It really changes everything. It did for them. And everyone was left sort of stunned by that belief hitting the ground in real life. In any communication of the Christian faith, these are foundational messages that we can convey, stories that we can tell. And I'd say people in 2023 are thirsty for living water. They're thirsty for living water. And despite all that makes doing any sort of public Christianity difficult, and they're difficult things, there is much to bring to the table that will be a welcomed gift if it's communicated effectively and clearly. So the message of 1 Peter for us today is hold on to the hope of the Christian message. Hold on to that. Always be prepared to give an answer for that hope that you have. And live the kind of life that invites that question. Well, may that be the truth for all of us as we engage with the people we love who are lost and in need of this story. Let me pray to finish. Father, thank you for this message from your word, from 1 Peter. Thank you for the ways in which it can help shape our engagement with our friends and with our neighbours and the people we know who don't know you. I pray for everyone here that in their various and different ways, they would be a faithful presence and a light that shines a light to you and draws people to you. I pray that you'd empower all of us to be able to do that well, with kindness and love and respect and humility. And may it make a big difference in this community and in communities around us. We ask for your help in that. Amen.